happy St. Patrick's Day. And we're honored to have the Honorable Brother Adam Shakur with us today. Judge?
Yes, sir. It's good to be with you, and it's my honor. I enjoy your program and glad to be a part of it.
Well, you know, when we get to be our age, it's good to be seen and not viewed, so we're thankful that we're here.
Absolutely.
And thank you, Lifetime, for fixing my equipment, so now we can get on with our program. You've seen so much happen in the city since the 60s that I wanted you on because I'm always running my mouth, and I admit it to the audience, about what I think is going on in the city. And I need somebody who has a better perspective on this than I have, because I just think that the city is not progressing as it should for the majority of the constituents that live in the city. Now, how do you feel about that?
Well, I think you're right on with that analysis, because for a city like Detroit, which is rich with its history, and I've been in various cities over the course of my life, and I can tell you that there's a lot of real compassion and charitable nature of many of the Detroiters and many people in Southeast Michigan. But with regard to that, I mean, just look at our NAACP dinner, largest civil rights assemblage of people sitting down, raising money, and they've been doing that since the early 50s. Started by a few conscientious black doctors in the NAACP, and it's generated quite a bit of money for various causes. Unfortunately, the job opportunities are dwindling. As a young man coming out of high school in the mid-60s, 2 days after graduation, I was on Miller Road at Ford and got hired and became a part of Local 600. That doesn't happen now. We aren't getting our young people situated economically. And if you don't work with the young, then you're cutting off a future and certainly impacting the present. So we need that.
Well, we lost a lot of jobs, unfortunately, in the automobile industry. Detroit had a population of 1.4 million people at one time.
Yes.
And now we're down between 600,000 and 700,000 people.
Right, and of course, advancements within our industry as far as the computer-generated improvements and mechanized electronic capacities that we've developed in that time period. But there are still needs for advancement in skills. I mean, it's still a need. Instead of jobs opening up as much, we have prison doors opening up. We have young men who have great futures feeling hopeless and turning, oftentimes, because people are going to eat, they have to feed their families, to those situations that cause them to get records. And records don't always mean that a person is in the best position to get a job. So with regard to that, I think there are wholesale aspects that we have to continue to be involved with in regards to helping those who have got into the prison system as they return. We've got to do criminal justice reforms as to giving them alternatives, improving the way in which people are going through our system of justice, which is, sometimes I don't like to call it a criminal justice system, because The police don't know what the courts are going to do, and the courts don't know what the prisons are going to do, and they're sometimes disjointed. So systems operate pretty much together. But it's a situation in which there are a lot of areas for Detroit and America, quite honestly, to improve in its treatment of our youth, and especially our black youth.
Well, the problem that I see from a little different perspective, I
Sure.
practice law all over the state, is that I think that there's a double standard. And people aren't willing to stand up and be forthright and honest about it. I mean, for example, if a Caucasian individual was sleeping in his car in one of the suburbs and the police came by, they stopped that individual. They might give him a ticket if they're drunk for drunk driving and just leave him alone, tell them to call one of these transportation services to make sure that they leave and go home. But if it's an African American individual, they're going to arrest that individual, search their car, and put him in jail. I mean, I see this all the time, and it's really upsetting to me that there's a double standard. And once it's brought to the head, where somebody's charged with a crime, it's hard to change things for individuals who've already been in the system. They're not getting a break. They're not getting an opportunity. We have these expungement fairs, for example, where we try and reverse things, and the majority of the individuals who come to the expungement fairs are people of color, whether they're Hispanic, whether they're African American, they're people of color. And they're the ones that have been in the system because they're the ones who've been subjugated in society when it comes to crimes. They don't have the funds, they don't have the resources or the ability to get that kind of representation. So they're the ones who are paying the price. It's tragic. A man came into my office. I'll share this little story with you, and we'll talk about it. He said, I was charged with armed robbery 25 years ago. I served my time, it came out, and I was watching my girlfriend's kids. This is about 8 years ago. And she came home, and we had an argument, so she called Protective Services and told them that I had molested one of the kids. Well, he was charged with CSC, criminal sexual conduct, and we won't get into all the terms of it. So he went to court. And he said his court-appointed attorney told him to plead guilty. So he said he had no choice because of his prior criminal record. Well, what kind of system do we have if people are forced to do things like that? You sat as a jurist for a long time. You understand the problem. Can you see through it when you're up there on the bench?
Well, yeah, I think you can if you do your job. I think with regard to the role that a judge plays is kind of the neutral arbiter of the facts that are presented by the prosecutor, the defense counsel, if they're sitting as the trier of fact in law as a judge. But if there's a jury, the jury, as you well know, tries the facts. But from a standpoint of incompetence of counsel, in the standpoint of what you know from your review of the evidence happens to be quite the opposite of what they're saying about an individual charged with a crime, and you have an attorney in front of you who's supposed to represent that individual, and he does or she does not do their job and merely seeks to plead them out for the sake of moving them through a system, can prove a huge injustice. But what you're, in essence, addressing is, I think, that that elephant in the room of the justice system. The elephant in the room is this doctrine of racism, or as I like to say, white supremacy, in that there is an unbalanced, and has been for many years in this country, a treatment of a people of color in some ways less than the treatment that they're entitled to constitutionally, and certainly less than the treatment that a comparable Caucasian may be treated to, whether they're of color is an essential aspect of perceptions. There was an organization many years ago, and it may still even be around, that a gentleman by the name of Frank Joyce organized in the 60s. It was called People Against Racism. And his idea was that the victims, really those who are the victims of racism, are not really the ones who have to always fight against that which they didn't create but were the victims of. But it is the obligation of those who have benefited, the whites, who are benefiting either by way of their own racism or by way of just being soft-spoken or never addressing the issue, from the disparity between white and black. So we have to speak out, not just as black or brown people. We have to speak out as white Americans to any aspect of what it is that is creating injustice. Injustice in the police department as it relates to the enforcement of laws, injustice in the court system as it relates to the quality of representation, injustice even in the perception of people toward others. Immediately, I have seen in examples in my life where I'm walking down the street and people don't know me who are Caucasian, and I may encounter someone who walks a little bit further over as though I'm going to do something to them, especially in times of the evening. That is somehow an immediate perception. Who is this person? Are they some threat to me? Maybe I better move over in some way. And that can occur in Detroit, that can occur in the suburbs, that can occur in another state. But the reality is there is a continuum of a concept in our society that said black people were less than white people. Now, of course, we have had a continuum in America since 1619 of African people in this country. We have fought in every single war. We have built the economy because, as you well know, the economy was agricultural in this country, which built its wealth. People came to this country for the benefits because land was being given to Europeans to come and say, here, develop this. This is land for you to grow your wealth and to do things. But you did it with a people who had been enslaved. Now, what people can be enslaved legally in a system for 246 years, 1619 to 1865, what people can be enslaved, then given freedom, but not a penny in their pocket?
Well, when they're given freedom, when they're given freedom, they're the individuals who unfortunately have a different mindset because they've just been given freedom. And they're the individuals who get into trouble in the system. Historically, that's been a truism. Would you agree with me on that?
Not necessarily would I agree that they have gotten into trouble because of the freedom. I think they gotten into trouble because a system that set them free for the basis of helping to win a war between the brothers between the North and the South. The society had broken down, and we have to have, and you can look at your history in reference to the Emancipation Proclamation, at that time, in 1863, the South was actually winning the war. But when they broke down the economic system of slavery in taking away the laborers in the South, it broke the agricultural strength of the South and began to bring down a system that helped to propel, 18 months or so later, the conclusion of the Civil War favorable to the North. I think what it was an inability to accept equality with that freedom, and that has been the calling voice of so many generations, that even though constitutionally we have freedom and then we have equal rights constitutionally, everyone gets their equal rights, but here and now we're still fighting. So the manifestation of that happens to be seen in various institutions of our society, economically, the criminal justice system, in terms of job abilities in being hired, being promoted, etc. So until, we can look at and we can analyze different effects of, but what's the cause? What's the major cause? America has to come to grips with the unequal treatment that was built in for more generations in this in terms of the African people, for more time than this country has been a country. If we say America was formed in 1776, when actually the Constitution was 1787, we have not come that far in time. Then a people were called property. A people were called 3/5 of a person for somebody else's power to elect representation. And that has not been addressed. And when you raise the issue, black folk may say, oh, why is he talking about that? White folks say, what are they complaining about? Look at what they've gotten now. Well, what they've gotten is less than what they're entitled to. And we have to, as a people and as a nation, as one nation, from one came many, we have to begin to address the issue, and we have to begin to look at areas in which we contribute as a nation to that continuation of inequality. And it'll manifest itself in various aspects of our society.
Now, bringing that closer to the greater metropolitan area, today, 2018, we still have that disparity.
Yes.
We still have the problems with education.
Yes.
We still have the problems with job opportunities.
Absolutely.
And there's a disparity in terms of what's offered in the suburbs as opposed to what's being offered in the city of Detroit right now, because when you go outside and you go into the neighborhoods, as I keep on saying on the show, nothing's going on in the neighborhoods except for maybe one section along the Golden Corridor between 6 and 8 Mile on Livernois that's redeveloping. Nothing else is really redeveloping to help stimulate the neighborhoods in the city of Detroit. I know that you were the deputy mayor, and I don't know if you agree or disagree with my statement, but something has to be done to help regenerate and regentrify those areas instead of downtown. All I hear is that they're going to have a new development downtown where the old Joe Mears restaurant used to be. Somebody's coming in and putting a high-rise over there. It's going to be another Tony district near the Eastern Market with high-rises, condominiums. You go down on Jefferson, the old Big Boys being demolished, and they're putting in a high-rise apartment building. But that's for a small group of people who are going to spend a couple hundred to $400,000, $500,000, depending on where they're at in the building, for condominiums. Now, that's not the average person in Detroit. They are just being subjugated and treated differently. What are we going to do about that?
Well, I think that some of the idea of developing Detroit economically is very good in terms of economics. But we have to, I mean, look at a downtown as maybe the living room in your home, the first place a person's going to come into. It's got to look good or they're not going to do anything else. But you can't just do a downtown or carve off a section of Detroit, which used to be called the Cass Corridor, now it's called Midtown, and or other segments of Detroit, Livernois, 7 Mile. You have to look at moving from the living room to the bedrooms, to the basement, to everywhere, and it has to be, if you're gonna, Detroit is one city. So if the plan is that it's inclusive and we've got to do economically one thing or two things at a time, that's fine. But what is the master plan and what is the timetable? Is it just for those who are investing in it? Well, then this land, perhaps, that the city owns in some of the other depressed areas may be slated for development 3 years from now or 2 years. Why not put the people into this equation of where things are going and when they're going to get there? Because some of the people who have been in this city who did not have the economic resources may be sitting on land that has a potential greater value. I certainly know that some of those individuals who own properties in the area of downtown would have perhaps not necessarily been so quick to maybe not pay taxes on them, or perhaps not so quick as to sell them at cut rates if they knew in the next year they were going to be the basis for those 400,000, 500,000 loft units or condominiums that are being built. So it's not that I'm opposed to growth. It's called educating the public, making sure that those citizens are partners with you so that the land speculators who have this information cannot come from wherever, China or wherever, because Detroit's property is being purchased by people from all across the world because they see potential. So from my vantage point, there's good and there's bad, and the bad mainly happens to do with the people who are not given the information and the timetable as it relates to some of the growth and development. And of course, Detroit's not economically in a position to do everything across the city all at once.
Well, you know,
And the people understand that, but we have to be a part of that. And it's called information. And we have to be a part of the process, especially where there's development that we're paying for by way of the tax incentives that are used by developers to go to banks and get loans, basically because there are monies that the people are going to be paying by way of the releases that they're being given for taxes that would normally be paid. And they can take that and they take it to the bank, and heck, they've got some financing that's as good as the bond rating of the city. So in this regard, I am pleased with development, but I'm not as pleased with the opportunities because we have entrepreneurs, developers who are Mexican, brown folk, black folk, who would like to share and be a part of the growth and the future of the city of Detroit, and should be given every opportunity to do so.
isn't it amazing? You and I have frequented the halls of justice many,
Yes.
many times. And now we're going to be forced to move because a developer is going to build a soccer stadium over there.
Yes.
And it was always important to keep the attorneys downtown. And I'm drawing the circle in front of the phone here, but it was important because we've got to go to different courts.
Yes.
We've got to be over in the circuit court. We've got to be in the 36th District Court. We've got to be over to Frank Murphy Hall of Justice. We've got the 2 jails next door. And all of a sudden, we're going to have to go up the road. That's really going to be inconvenient for lawyers, isn't it?
Yeah, but so what? As far as the lawyers, is it inconvenient for citizens who are brought into the system? And really, in my estimation, parking downtown. Let me just be a little bit of a devil's advocate in this sense, or an angel's advocate, if you wish. That I have people who would come over to the 36th District Court, and I was chief judge of that court some years ago, and they would tell me when they would appear before me as to why they weren't in court for, I'm setting aside a warrant, a bench warrant or something, that they could not afford the parking downtown because the parking lots were charging these exorbitant rates for them to have to come in and stay there all day. Some came and they left. They had actually shown, and I would have a clerk to verify that, yes, they had been here, but they left before the court case because they either had to get to a job or they couldn't stay. So I opened a weekend court, a Saturday court, and got judges who very much wanted to help, and they worked and they volunteered their time. They have to work on Saturday and Sunday. Only the criminal docket worked at that time. So we got them in traffic court. We had them in civil court. We had the judges participate in helping the community. So when we go to another location, whenever the courts are moved to another location, let's try to make sure that those who have perhaps exploited that issue with high increases in parking do something more reasonable and more compatible with the people. Of course, wherever the courts are, the lawyers will go. And some are more conveniently located than others. But yeah, it's a change because the whole history of the Detroit courts were downtown Detroit. The criminal court, 1300 Randolph was the police station, and right down the street was the recorder's court, which was the criminal court. When they closed that down, they built the Frank Murphy Hall of Justice, which was just a block away. Now we're talking about a couple of miles away. But in terms of that, we have to have a relationship with the public. And the public is what generates our whole way of focus, because as public servants, we serve the public. And I would generate that more in the dialogue, in planning and development and other aspects. What's in the best interest of the public? And if you can meet that test, then I'm for it.
And we're going to take a break for a minute. We'll be right back.
Are you in legal trouble? Are you in need of legal advice? Or just have general legal questions? Call 1-800-529-8721. That's 1-800-LAW-USA1. And watch Law Power Hour and get your questions answered by experienced attorneys who are experts in their field. That's Law Power Hour, hosted by Barry Keller, attorney at law. Saturdays at 10 a.m. here on WHPR Detroit Live.
You know, it's really, a great, great opportunity for me to pick your brain, and thank you for coming, because
My pleasure.
having sat as a jurist and chief judge in the court, there's a serious problem, and we talked about it. One of the things that really bugged me was that people would get charged with possession of marijuana, for example, and it was I'd call it a trivial issue because they're not in the business of dealing or distribution at the time. But it'd get on their record, and then they would have to wait 5 years to get an expungement, and then they wouldn't be able to get a job, and all these issues develop, and then they stay at home and they have kids, and then they can't get the kids to go to school, and we go fast forward to the next generation, and I'm serious about this. We've got 9,000 high school dropouts right now in the city of Detroit, and we need to do something to get those 9,000 high school dropouts back into the education system, because if they stay out of the system, it just causes a proliferation, causes more high school dropouts in the next generation and the next generation, and then we really see a division in the community that we don't need. So give me some insight on this, please, our listeners.
Well, I don't have the answer, but I have some areas in which I believe we need to look at more, with a greater focus. It is clear from various educational studies that there are certain predictors as early as second or third grade, maybe in areas of reading, maybe in other areas where those persons can be identifiable, who may be more likely to drop out before they complete high school, are more likely, believe it or not, predictors of those that may fall victim to being a part of the criminal justice system. Yet, in our legislative wisdom across this country, and certainly within the state, it's kind of a lock 'em up and throw away the key mentality. Bind the hands of judges who are to be told how much time you must sentence someone, and you can't consider certain things. We will legislatively tell you what you are to consider and what your results should be within a certain sphere of punishment. And if, from a standpoint of, if you know that at a time when a person's 8, 9, or 10 years of age, then why are there not more resources put into the educational system and the types of education that those individuals are receiving that may be able to thwart that process that is almost a 50, 80, 70, whatever the percentage is that these studies show, indicator of this person not making it through the system. So what I'm in essence saying, we've got to revolutionize our way of thinking about the growth, the education, and the support mechanisms that are needed for our young people early enough to impact. And those that are older, they're not throwaways. I think sometimes society likes to think that they can lock up young people at 15 or 16 and put them in adult prisons and just forget that they exist as human beings. But even where those have exhibited the kind of behavior that causes them to be taken out of the system of education and put in the system of corrections, kind of a misnomer, because oftentimes they correct nothing. But in that manner, what programs are there that will treat this 14, 15, 16-year-old child in a way where they can be able to develop whatever is absent and begin to make them have hope? You see, the essence of why a person does often do things contrary to what society wants or what their family wants for them is that individual has given up on their own self. They have given up on their ability to think positively of whatever their life is, whether it's because of their experiences at an early age. They don't see their own self-worth. And we've got programs, we've got people trained who can impact their lives, but they can't do it without the adequate resources. And we're in an age now where government doesn't want to pay for anything. Even our roads, they don't want to pay for things that are just what we consider to be safe ways in which people can interact with each other. But they want to give everybody a license to carry guns and walk the streets with their guns flashing, and but not looking at how can we impact positively these lives, because they can make contributions. And every child that we see is really the future, and the potential that we have to impact that child's life is the ability that we have to impact the future. So let's kind of focus our legislative bodies into that, our court systems into that, and our way of addressing whatever social ills, if we can define what it is that are causal connections, then let's put the resources together.
Let's take a call for a moment. Good morning.
Good morning. It's a great show today, Attorney Keller. I appreciate you having Dr. Shakur on. Dr. Shakur, you have a wealth of knowledge, and I appreciate you being on this show. From what you just spoke about, I believe that the systematic government that's already in place here in the city of Detroit, our legislators, they don't care about our kids. They don't care. The only thing they care about is lining their pockets from the growth of the downtown Detroit area, midtown, downtown. They don't care about the neighborhoods. They don't care about our kids. They care about lining their pockets, and that's along with our mayor, our current mayor, as well as some of our legislators, our city councilmen, and our city councilwomen that are representatives, especially those state reps that are up in Lansing. So what do we need to do besides going on? Because when we go out and we vote, it doesn't change the complexity, because, you know, we don't vote in massive droves as we used to back in the day up underneath, you know, the time, and it's at a time where you were out there and you were making sure that the people had the resources that they needed. So what do we need to do today?
Well, I think you're right on in terms of the focus, because the focus has to be on how we can improve our community, and we have to elect persons that have a history, not just someone that may share a name that's similar to someone else. But, you know, when somebody steps out and says, I want to be a leader in this area or that area, then we've got to be a little bit more analytical and say, well, what is it that they have done? Are they prepared for this? Otherwise, it can become a battle of the names, or a battle of the ability to convey ideas, when in essence the idea can never be a reality, because they're no more interested in that than they are in just perhaps holding the office to run for another office.
Well, money elects people. I mean, let's really break it down a little further here. You got a lot of money, you can put on a campaign. Financially, that may make the difference. The person who has the most gold has a better shot at winning the election.
That's the common wisdom, but I'm the old school. And the old school was, if people know you, if people get to know you. So that means you have to do things not just by way of TV. Sometimes it's called shoe leather. You've really got to walk the streets. You've got to knock on doors. You've got to make yourself into an ongoing communicator of why you should be there, and what it is that you have done, and what it is you want to do. Now, Mayor Young used to have, when he was in the Senate, he would have a people's convention. David Holmes also did the same thing, the late and great Senator David Holmes. They would have in their districts a meeting of those people who were the voters of their district. And they would then talk about what legislation the people wanted, what were the issues, and they would take that agenda to Lansing. And they would implement things like, for instance, when then Senator Young helped to create the concept of community participation. It came out legislatively as a kind of decentralization of the Detroit schools, but that was to give the community a voice in the various regions of the school district. For a large, then it was maybe 180,000 students, and that began to get community input. People like our former council member and Congresswoman Barbara Rose Collins got involved. I think she was at Region 1 as the representative of that. People that talked about the idea of a school that would teach young black males how to be able to participate in their communities, what role it was for young black men to have, and the so-called male academies got a lot of resistance, but that came out of Miss Barbara Rose Collins and a young then Administrator Clifford Watson. I mean, you have a mechanism, but the mechanism has to be the voices that are allowed to speak, and then secondarily, and really right alongside, the people have to vote, not just 15, 20%. That's a minority ruling a majority. You've got to get out there 80%, 85%. I almost cry when I see the numbers of those who are registered to vote. Everybody's not even registered, and it comes up 15, 20%, 12%. That's absolutely a loss of hope. People don't believe that their voice does count. Your voice always counts. If you give up your voice, you've given up your power.
Now, I want to switch gears for a minute because I've got an important issue to ask you about, and it's something that you're intimately involved with as a a lawyer, as a deputy mayor, as a judge. Suppose we had a deferral system. Somebody comes into the criminal justice system and they're in school. Instead of sending them to prison, the courts and the schools would get together and there'd be a deferral program where you have to finish school, and that would be your obligation to avoid going to prison. Do you think that we would save more individuals by having a deferral program and getting the parents of the individual who's in the system involved in it?
I think so, but I think we probably have to dedicate a particular school because there are some programs that a traditional school might not have that these young people need. And in my era, they had a deferral program. It was called the U.S. Army. And that was people that came into the system, if they were, 17 or so, maybe had dropped out of school, the judge would allow for that person to join the services. And so there were recruiters that were around the courts, and they would, talk to them, and the judge would sometimes defer or drop charges as long as they were going to serve in the United States military. So yes, I think it's a great idea because it gives an alternative. It gives an area where there is still hope. And in the African American community, it's unfortunate, but so many of our families have been touched by the criminal justice system in some way or the other. It may not be as prominent in the white communities of America, but then again, once again, we go back to that demon of white supremacy, and it permeates everything. But certainly the impact in our criminal justice system has been more black and brown people who are incarcerated in our prisons. So absolutely, because, see, we can't give up hope. We can't give up in trying to impact our young people's lives. And you can't ever convince me that you cannot help change a person's life who's 15 or 16 or 17 years of age with the adequate resources that are available in what has been called the world's greatest democracy. Even though, of course, we know democracy is a term that may not be as applicable, but it has been called that. Let's live up to that expectation. Let's put the resources together. The people control the government. I don't care if it's a theocracy, if it's democracy, if it's a monarchy, if it's a dictatorship, whatever system it is, no one can lead a people who are organized that are in opposite direction of those people being led. So I don't think that that has been given the attention it needs. What can we do? When there's a crisis, when there's a cancer in our society, we have to do everything we can to try to get that cancer out. And that cancer is that these people have not had the resources that they need, and we should do everything humanly possible to provide them.
Once the federal and the state government aren't willing to allocate the money necessary to carry out these programs, if we just go right down to what you said about half an hour ago, the young people, you can predictably identify character traits, social problems, education problems when they're 6, 7 years old. The resources aren't there. There isn't the staffing there to shore up these individuals, to identify the problems, to work through these problems. So they have their character disorders, they have their sociopathic behavior, and it continues to go on and on and on unnoticed. And those individuals became the ones that are disenfranchised from the rest of their school community and the ones who come to school toting guns and create problems for the other citizens going to school.
Well, this is precisely my point. It directly goes back to this education of the voter, the participation of the voter. About 20 or so years ago, in fact, in 1995, leading up to the 96 presidential elections, I created a concept along with Mayor Young and then the Detroit Democratic Club, now the Coleman Young Detroit Democratic Club, with the concept of a National Day of Freedom. And that concept was to create for America a national holiday for voting. Declare it that. And of course, I talked with various leaders across the country, and the Black Congressional body, Congressional Black Caucus, voted unanimously. There were 40 representatives. They voted in favor of it. We pushed it all around the country. And of course, that became a calling card. Unfortunately, the legislation did not work its way through because Republicans believed, it was a nonpartisan effort, but Republicans believed that that would encourage more participation, and thus more participation meant that they weren't going to be as able to marginalize areas in which Democratic voters were, and voter suppression was a part of their whole concept of participation, suppress certain votes, gear up other votes, and of course they would win elections. Well, that concept caught fervor in the community along with other efforts to getting out the vote, so much so that it was in the Jet magazine credited with helping to give Bill Clinton a second term. Now, fortunately, when I went to the Democratic convention, they didn't let me in the Republican convention. When I went to the Democratic convention in '96, the AFL-CIO leadership, political leadership, said, yes, we'll go with that. In fact, why don't you come on and help us do it? I said, no, it's nonpartisan. I can't do it for you, but I can do it for everybody because I want black Republicans, white Republicans, I want everybody to support this idea because it's just saying, be an American. This is important. Be a part of that effort. Well, it helped Bill Clinton. The UAW later used that as a part of their bargaining process. And of course, their members have that day off. But when I talked to some of the leaders on the East Coast and other places in America, they said, do you know how much that cost? And I said, no. He said, well, it cost us another day that we have to pay our workers. And we just can't, with all the holidays, do that. So we're supportive of the idea, but we can't mandate that. And that's really the process. America is one man, one person, one vote. Why is it that a system that depends upon the people's participation is so weak on the concept of encouraging in every humanly possible way the participation of as many people that we can to make their contribution and their voices be heard? I think that's the key. I think that in our system that we have to encourage that and be a part of that.
I want to thank you for coming today, but I want you to come back.
Thank you.
Because you just gave me a new thought that I want to share with you when you come back about maybe we could vote over 4 or 5 days. But we'll talk about that next time.
Thank you, sir. I appreciate it.
Okay. Y'all have a great day today. Enjoy it.